Hello and welcome to Adrian Beyond the Classroom. In the last video, I introduced the idea of looking at 7 decades of my life and my perspectives about life, and wanting to include everybody who reaches a certain age and then starts to learn and reflect on what they've achieved in their life. And we started off in the first video looking at my initial experience of school dinners. So it's quite a humorous thing. When I was born in 1956, in fact, my date was 14th of October 1956. So check out those dates and see what famous people were born on those dates. But I was born on the 14th of October 1956. And it was during the crisis, the Suez crisis. So I felt when I first started doing these videos that that was ominous. It was an ominous situation that we were witnessing something going on in the world. Not that I was aware of it in 1956, which is very much akin to what is happening 70 years later with the Hormuz Strait and the Suez Canal, both having conflicts there. But I want to move on from that. I want to move further, because what shaped the people we became? I think that is a big question, and there's always been the nature-nurture debate about children growing up, their lives, what their environment is, who their parents or parent is, or if they've been fostered. There's many cases of people who have had very, very different upbringings, and it's important to understand what happens next and why people behave the way they do. So what I thought I would do today was introduce you to my background and where I came from. So the first people that I want to talk about today are my parents. Now, when I thought about the date that I was born on, 1956, it was literally 11 years after the Second World War had finished. So it makes me feel even older when I think about that. When we think about the Second World War as well, we always kind of think about it in black and white. And recently I've seen many conversions based on the Second World War, where we have now been able to add color to those film clips. And boy, does that resonate, does that make it real and tangible. But I want to talk about my dad because he was in the Second World War, and he was in the RAF, and he was in a very famous squadron. So I want to share who he was and what he was doing in 1944. So this is a picture of my father. He's the guy here. He's next to a pilot called Bill Adams, who was Canadian, an amazing pilot, a bit of a maverick, and he used to literally fly the Lancaster bomber. Now, my dad was not a pilot or a navigator. He was the wireless operator, or the radio communication inside the Lancaster. And Lancaster was a very, very cramped aircraft. And this was a crew that he was with. And there was always 8 members in the crew. And these guys were on this Lancaster flying over Germany. And my father was only 22 years old. And that's him, 22 years old. So when he went on the Lancaster, he would be handed a cigarette or two to take with him on the plane, because they used to think that if you were in a Lancaster bomber or any type of bomber, you were a sitting duck. Now, my father managed to achieve over 35 operations. That made him, you became a vet after 10. So that made him a very established veteran. And many stories he told me about on the Lancaster bomber resonated with me. Most of this era of people don't talk about the war much, but my dad, I did have time to speak to him when I was older, and he told me some many stories. But the point is, he, at that young age, had gone into the Royal Air Force and became an RAF person. Now, so that is something to think, and I always found that fascinating, especially even now when I look back. I wish I could have had more time. Now, the other person in my life was my mum. Now, here's another one. This is where my mother was born in that era. She obviously was not involved in the military. When she was very young, though, during the war, and this is before she met my dad, she was an evacuee. She was born in Birmingham, and she was evacuated out to the Cotswolds and lived there. And she was one of several children, 9 children, 7 children, and she was the second youngest. Her sister, her eldest sister, was a girl called Joan, and she was in the Women's Royal Air Force and doing her bit. So my mother became an evacuee. So you can imagine that having parents who went through those experiences, they would have built certain ways forward. So the question I want to ask is it in the DNA? Is it all in the DNA? Is it all the connection that makes us suddenly take interest in certain things? Or is it something else? And the nature-nurture debate still exists today. People wondering out there, if you're in different environments, would you behave differently? So I'll just tell you one story about myself as I was moving on. So when I talked about my dinners, school dinners, in 1963, my father in the RAF got a posting to Germany. You can imagine. At that age, I was only 7. And at the age of 7, I still had, the only understanding I had was the Germans were bad people at that point. And as a 7-year-old boy, when we were driving in a taxi, all the way across through Europe to the RAF station in a place called RAF Larbrück in Germany, we had to go through the German countryside, and I literally would cower down in the car seat because I was afraid of what was happening. As it happens, to cut a long story short, it was a much nicer surprise because the war was over. The war was over. There's always conflict and things going on outside of the war. But apart from that, Germany were no longer actively involved in anything too bad. And I met up with a young boy where he had to move into a place called Cleveland on the border between Germany and Holland, and near to the RAF base in RAF Larbrück. And we had to go and live in an apartment until our married quarter was actually passed on to my father. And we moved into that probably 6 months later. But in the interim, I met and made friends with a boy called Klaus, same age as me. He couldn't speak English, I couldn't speak German, and we got on like a house on fire. So when we talk about our journeys in life are very, very different. Our experiences are unique. And, as I've grown through time, many of the things that I say today are probably based on the way my parents told me to speak and to have opinion about things and the way I would behave. So what we have now is a situation as we go further on in time that there's never such a thing as a straight line. And I, for one, as I went through this era, 1956 and 66, was introduced and was witness to many events. One of the most dramatic events that occurred to me was the assassination of President Kennedy, and that happened literally after we just moved into our married quarter in 42 Harris Drive on RAF Larbrook Base, where the radio came on and said President Kennedy has been assassinated, and it was in November, and I remember it to this day. So that experience was really quite a shocking experience. And then we know later on in the 60s, we had other areas that were beginning to be highlighted, and the way there was segregation between white and black people in the world, in America, and the assassination of Martin Luther King takes place in that era as well. But my greatest recall of 1966, and this is what I want you to share about 1966 and about your parents and what you want to say. Were they instrumental in what you did next? But in 1966, that was when England won the World Cup for the first time. And that is something absolutely that we can't ever recapture again. And I remember when I was living then in 1966, we'd moved back to England, and I was at a base called RAF Wittering, which was near Peterborough, in Lincolnshire. And I can remember living in a married quarter there, running out with a tennis ball and trying to score 3 goals like Jeff Hurst. So many things were going on in that period between 56 and 1966. And what would be great is, did you follow? Ask yourself this question, and these are the stories I want to hear. And please get involved. The first video, I've only got about 24 views, but look, I want to get more people involved. This is a way of sharing our experiences and showing that, we all have a different journey. And as I said, we're diverted. There are things that we were in our control, and there are things outside of our control, and that's a big step that we learn. And the important thing is, did you follow the interests and careers of your parents in any way? That's one question. So what childhood influence shaped your direction in life the most? And if you lived through the period I said, what do you remember the most about that decade? So if you've seen and witnessed things in 56 to 66, then share what your thoughts are about that. Obviously, if you're somebody much younger, this is more like a history lesson. And, it's incredible that it is, again, an iconic year that the World Cup is taking place in America and Mexico, and it's 70 years since England won, and apparently England have got the chance of winning. So please, if you've enjoyed this, please follow me, please make comments, please get involved and share your stories. There are more stories I have to tell, and more definitions and more closures in the road of sort of journeying to your future and going through many of the phases of life. And where I sit today is reflecting about what I did. Do I have regrets? I think everybody has regrets in some way, but at the time you don't know what life is going to throw at you. But again, please get in touch and do click on and look at the information at the bottom of this video, and you'll see what I've requested you to do. Okay, so listen, take care, and I hope this has been of interest to you today.